and welcome to Ink Outside the Box. I'm Robin.
And I'm Chaz. And today we're going to be talking about building a character. So, obviously, every story needs a main character and lots of other characters around them. So, today we're going to talk about how to build believable characters.
Yeah, you definitely want your characters to feel alive on the page. They need to be relatable, and people either need to love or hate them. So, Chaz, how do you build a character that readers will remember?
Well, I try to make them rounded because everybody you meet is going to be they're going to have hidden parts of themselves that you never see, so Mrs. Jones down the road, she might seem like the busybody who comes out and moans at you about the state of your garden or something,
Mhm.
but you don't know what's going on with Mrs. Jones. You don't know if she's got a child that's in hospital, or if
Mhm.
she's missing her husband who died 3 years ago, or
Mhm.
if she's got a collection of spoons that the Antiques Roadshow would be delighted to see. You know what I mean? We all have these weird little things about us that nobody knows. And I think if you
Mhm.
can build your characters so that even if nobody else in the story at this time knows those things about them, you know those things about them, and you will make them behave accordingly.
Yeah.
That's how I try to build characters.
One of the tips that I use is imagine that your character is going to a party. This doesn't have to be part of your story, but imagine that they're going to a party. So what is the first thing that they go to as far as food? Like what do they pick up on the little table that has all the snacks? Who do they talk to, or do they talk to anybody? Do they get out on the dance floor and do they dance, or do they sit back and watch other people dance? And things like that, because once you kind of have that idea of what a character is or who they are, then you can build on that. Like you said, your reader is not going to know that the first thing that your character is going to pick up at a party is going to be the sweets, or hide a couple of biscuits in their pockets for later or something like that. So but you know that, and while you're writing that, you can make sure that they behave, like you said, behave in a way that fits that character profile.
Yeah, and a good way to do that is to build a character checklist. Go through, create your cat when you create a character, write a checklist for them. What's their favorite color? What's their favorite type of music? Do they even listen to music? I actually have come across two people in my 55 years of life who have said that they don't listen to music, which I didn't think was humanly possible, but apparently it is.
Hmm.
What kind of clothes do they like? Do they like comfortable clothes? Do they like smart clothes? Do they always wear high heels? um Even if they're a man, do they always wear high
Hmm.
heels? You need to get to know your characters.
Sometimes you have to kind of get to know your character a little bit before you can actually make that checklist, but it is very important to do that so you do have that information to refer to when when you're writing and you get to a point where what would that character
What would they do?
do?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. So do you
Yeah.
build your characters from scratch, or do you put parts of yourself or parts of people that you know into your characters?
Of course, I absolutely steal from everywhere. I'm a magpie. Right. So I read a book recently that was written by a woman I know, and there were two characters in it, and I know exactly who she based them on. Um, and it was just lovely to read because I knew them. I knew the
Mhm.
characters when I read it. And I love doing that. I love the idea of, you know one of my friends or family reading a story that I've written and knowing exactly where I got that snippet of personality from.
Yeah.
I enjoy characters that are slightly silly or slightly
Hmm.
quirky at times. So in Search of Strawberries, the character of Granny is probably my favorite character. And she gets her words mixed up. So she says, the world's gone to hell in a hand blender, and silly things like that. And I love that kind of nonsense because people are full of nonsense. We've all
Yeah.
got such silly little quirks. And I mean, you can't spend an entire book just making someone like mental, like
No.
daft, like crazy.
Well,
They've got to have some,
unless that's the premise of the book, but yeah.
yeah, and yeah. But I think it's nice to make a reader smile at
Hmm.
something quirky in a character, as long as you don't overdo it and you still keep them realistic. I
Hmm.
mean, you've got to have realism, haven't you?
Yeah.
And I think also and I know we're going to be doing dialogue, uh, but really think about how your characters speak, I think, as well, because that makes them who they are.
Hmm.
Some people swear a lot,
Hmm.
and other people rarely do. I swear all the time. I try and curb it for these sessions, but I'm pretty foul-mouthed. My grandma, I can remember her saying that she'd never sworn in her life.
Wow.
She'd once smoked a woodbine and she'd never said the F word, and which is really sweet. That's who,
Yeah.
that's who Nan was.
Yeah.
Um, so I think people are very different, and
Yeah.
our characters need to reflect that.
I
Yeah, go on.
think using people that you know, or even people you've observed, because we have in one of our previous videos, we talked about eavesdropping. And
Yeah,
part of eavesdropping, if you can do it without being obvious that that's what you're doing, is to pay attention to people, people watch, go sit in the park or get on a train and make a round trip to wherever you live, if you have access to a train or public transport, and watch people, because you can use little quirks in somebody that you've observed that you've never met before. You can put a little bit of that into your character as well. But as you
yeah.
said, they definitely need to be real, but everybody has little quirks that they have that sometimes they wish they didn't have, or sometimes they emphasize because they quite like that about themselves and that kind of thing. So I think that needs to come through in our characters as well.
Actually, a really good example of people watching and how it has made a character that I love. I kind of love and hate. The Rocky Horror Show, the Rocky Horror
Mm.
Picture Show, written by Richard O'Brien. So I was watching a documentary about it the other day, very interesting actually. And Tim Curry, who plays Frankenfurter, he said when he first got the role, he was going to give Frankenfurter a German accent
Oh,
because he was
because of his
called
name.
Frankenfurter,
Yeah.
yeah. And then he said he was on a bus, I think it was a bus, and he overheard a conversation, and one of the people talking was so unbelievably posh speaking. They were like, "Oh yes," and he suddenly thought, "Oh, I'll do him like that.
Oh,
I'll do
perfect.
Frankenfurter like that." And can you imagine if the character of Frankenfurter in the Rocky Horror Picture Show had not had the voice that
Hmm.
Tim Curry gave him that
Hmm.
he overheard on the bus? It
Hmm.
would have been, for me, nothing like as good as it is. It's just absolutely perfect, and I think that's a good example.
So
And
that.
another example of how things don't work is when the characters are a bit flat, I think.
Mhm.
Have you ever seen Jesse Stone with Tom Selleck? He's a
No, I'm
cop
not a big
in
Selleck fan, to be fair.
I still fancy him from Magnum, but that's my issue. But yeah, so he plays a cop in a small town called Paradise, and he's every character in I love it. It's a great cop show actually, but every character in it says, "I'm very fond of you, Jesse Stone," and I just think, would every character say that to him? I don't think I've ever said to anybody in my life, "I'm
No,
very fond of you, Robin Smith." You know what I
no,
mean? It's
no.
like, do people talk like that? But they all say it to him, and it's like it just irks me. It ruins
Yeah.
what would otherwise be a really good show for me. So I think you've got to think about that.
You also have to think about how your character is going to interact with other people as well, because we don't
Oh
interact
yeah,
with different people the same. We interact differently
yeah,
with older people, with children, with strangers,
certainly.
with people we don't
Yeah.
like. So you also have to take that in consideration, especially when it comes time to make your list, because in your novel or in your short story, your character is going to be interacting with different people, probably. I
Yeah.
mean, you will get the odd story now and then where a person is on their own, or they're maybe only with one other person in the story. But for the most part, most characters, most novels and most short stories have multiple characters that the protagonist will interact with,
Yeah.
and you have to be able to know that that person is going to speak to an older person differently than they would a child, or
Yeah.
maybe a work colleague in a different way than it's somebody that they don't like. So keep that in mind as well. And that we'll go into a little bit more detail about that when we do our video about dialogue. And if you
Yeah.
want to know when that comes out, all you have to do is subscribe. We do a new video every Monday at 6 p.m. UK time. And if you hit subscribe, it doesn't cost anything. And if you click the little bell icon, YouTube will remind you when it's time for one of our new videos when it's come out, so you can make sure that you see it. So just remember to do that, and you will not miss any one of our episodes.
Dialogue and character are very connected, aren't they? Because they you, a person's dialogue comes from the person's character.
That's it. Yeah.
So if yeah, so it's well worth watching the the session on dialogue, I think, because it'll be very connected to this one on character.
Another thing when you're developing your character is to know what your character wants and why they want it. Now, that sounds like I'm going back and repeating myself on the plot video. That is going to drive the story, and for your readers to know what the plot's going to be, or how to follow the plot, then the character has to be very clear about what they want and why they want it. So I want $1 million. Okay, but why do you want $1 million?
Don't we
I
all?
mean,
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
yeah,
I
yeah.
want I want something to be successful. I want to finish this novel. So, why do I want to finish this novel? Just because I want to finish this novel. That's just a really weak example, but you have to have a really good idea about what your character wants in order to write your story in the first place. So that also comes
Well,
down to who they are.
yeah, and where they are, it goes back to setting as well, because I did see a very funny cartoon about Breaking Bad, and if Breaking Bad had been set in the UK, there would be no story because we don't pay for healthcare. We've got the National Health Service. So
True.
Walter White, his entire reason for getting involved in the whole drug production was to pay his medical bills. So that works great in the US
Yeah.
because it's a real issue. Not so much in the UK because
No.
you just go to the hospital and they pay for, the your taxes have already paid for it. So, and I mean, like you say, I want $1 million. Why? Why
Hmm.
do you want them? Is there a reason like Walter White has, or are you just like everybody wants a million?
In relation to Breaking Bad, do you want your main character? Do you want your protagonist? Do you want them to be liked or loathed? Do you want them to be a bad guy but also be a little bit sympathetic? Do they make a
Yeah.
metamorphosis and change to be a different person by the time that the story is finished? And if any of those things are true, then you need to kind of know how that's going to happen and the things that character basically trips over in order to kind of set those things in motion.
And actually, I think Breaking Bad is an excellent example of sympathetic characters that aren't necessarily really good guys. Oh, the only character I really, really don't like in Breaking Bad is Skylar, the wife. She's the good girl. She's like really well behaved,
Hmm.
certainly at the beginning. But Walter and Jesse and Saul, the lawyer, they're just they're great characters because they're interesting, I think.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
know, they're not perfect, they're very flawed,
Hmm.
and they get themselves into all sorts of shenanigans
That's
because of
it.
it. But that
Yeah.
but you're rooting for them,
Hmm.
the same way um it train spotting,
Hmm.
it's again, it is full of flawed characters, but and in the book actually, more so than the film, Renton is not particularly likable,
Hmm.
but I don't know, maybe it's just that he's the best of a bad lot. I think my favorite character out of the train spotting uh, guys is Spud. I love Spud. He's
Hmm.
just so sort of tragic. Um,
Yeah.
but in comparison to Sick Boy and Begbie, Renton's actually he's not really as bad. So I don't know. I don't know. It's a clever thing, I think, when a writer makes you love a character that's that flawed.
Well, this
Um,
isn't really a book or something, but it had to get written, it had to be written down because it's a script. It's the characters in Sons of Anarchy, for instance.
oh, I haven't seen that,
All
but I've
of
heard
those
it's brilliant.
guys
Yeah.
are baddies. They're all
Are
bad.
they?
None of them are
Yeah.
good. But they write the writer, and I'm gonna have to find out who the writer is, and I'll put it on the screen. But the writer for Sons of Anarchy was someone who was able to write the characters, even as bad and I mean, not flawed. These are bad, bad
Bad
people,
guys.
very bad guys. I mean, the body count on Sons of Anarchy is out of this world. But there are times when you're like almost pulling for the character, and you're like, wait a minute, they're bad guys. What am I doing?
Yeah.
So that actually tells me that whoever wrote that script knew what the heck they were doing because they
Yeah.
made
Yeah.
you care about a very bad, bad person, and you didn't really so much want him or her to get comeuppance as you did you wanted to know what the heck they're going to get into next kind of thing, and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that kept you going back to see what was going to happen. But another thing that we need to do as writers is to make sure that our characters have a change, whether that's good or bad or ugly. We need to make sure that they have a change. And something that I can go back to as far as like a reference to this is the character Mac from Local Hero, because he starts out when he goes to this little Scottish village to buy them out. He's very clean cut. He's wearing his suit and his tie and his vest, and he's got his hair all, taken care of, and he's wearing his nice shoes. By the end of the film, he's in a cardigan, and he's not wearing his tie anymore. He doesn't even pay attention to his watch that keeps going off. He just leaves it in a tide pool, and it gets waterlogged, and he's decided he wants to stay. That is not the same guy that you started the film out in. He made a complete
Yeah.
and utter change of character, not even recognizable from his first, from the first time that you see him to the time that he's leaving. It just breaks your heart because he doesn't want to leave. He wants to stay. And
Yeah.
that film is one of my favorite films of all time. It really comes back to being able to write a character that changes but is so believable in just that short amount of time. And that takes a lot of skill, it takes practice, and it takes research.
Yeah. And I think that transformation, it's like it's a finding yourself story, isn't it? It's discovering what's actually important in your life, and that's a great premise for
Hmm.
any story. You don't even realize that you need to find what makes you happy because you think you already are, and then you
Yeah.
discover, and that's it's a great uh a great thing for any character to go through, I think. And sometimes, you know, you can start off with the bad guy being like that, and actually by
Hmm.
the end of the book, you've like, oh, I like him now, even though you
Yeah.
hated him at the beginning, It's yeah, but again, it goes round to it goes back to having well-rounded characters,
Yeah.
because even bad guys, love their dog or their kid
Well,
or
they're
whatever,
they're human, aren't they?
yeah, human. And that's I have read some stories with characters that are the good guy is a good guy, the good girl is a good girl, and the
Hmm.
baddie is a baddie, and it's like I want more from them.
Yeah.
I don't just want a lovely character who's all brilliant, and then a bad person who gets their comeuppance. I want more. I want more from a story
They have to
personally.
be multifaceted, I think. I think there's
Yeah.
dark and light in everybody, and that needs
Oh
to
yeah.
come through in your characters as well. So, is there a particular character that you can think of that you loved to hate, or that you were like angry at yourself because you liked them and they weren't the best of characters?
I watched an old episode of Trial and Retribution last night by Linda
Hmm.
LaPlante.
Hmm.
I haven't actually read the books, but it's series three, and the bad guy in it is played by Richard E. Grant,
Oh,
um,
he's
who
wonderful.
is oh, his character in this is just he's just awful, but he's just so funny as well. And actually, my favorite film of all time is probably With Nail and I, and Richard
Yep,
E. Grant
yep.
plays With Nail, and he is just wonderful in that. And again, With Nail's a character that you sort of, he's not a nice guy, but
No.
you just love him really because he's just so tragic. And this character played by Richard E. Grant in Trial and Retribution is the same. He's just so it's the tragedy in him. It's the tragic side of him. He's like ooh, ooh, sort of simpering and weepy, and it just makes you want to look after him, even though he's not a nice
Maybe
character.
something
So yeah, I
happened to
think
him in his past that turned him into being a nasty person, that if something had been different, he might have been a nice guy.
yeah, Linda LaPlante was like this. Oh yes, this happened in his past. She obviously when she had something in mind. But again, writers are quite evil when it comes to making, writing. Right, you know, I would never in real life
No.
hurt somebody's character, damage somebody's character the way I would a character in a book.
One of my favorite love to hate characters was Negan from The Walking Dead. We talked about The Walking Dead last week, and he
Yeah.
was, I mean, like really, really bad. But boy, I loved him. I couldn't get enough of him. Jeffrey Dean Morgan played him like a fiddle. He played that character so, so well. But again, we've got this kind of retribution arc that he actually paid for some of the stuff that he did, but then he also had a metamorphosis where he changed into almost somebody that was a good guy.
I really must go back to watching some of that. I find I sometimes find that I do this. I watch the first season of something, and then the second season, it doesn't grab me quite as well.
Uh-huh.
Particularly with American shows, I think because there's so many in the first season, and by the time they get to the second one, I'm like, I don't think they know where they're going with this.
Yeah. Well,
So
at least with The Walking Dead, they kept it to like 16 episodes. But I find that if I'm reading a book and a character is interesting, then I want to know what happens to them. I want to know that they're going to be okay or that things are going to work out for them. So I get invested in the character. But that comes down to the writer making sure that I care about the character as a
yeah,
reader. Because if
yeah.
you don't make sure that your reader is invested in your characters, then they are not going to care one way or the other what happens to them. And
What?
you
Yeah,
want that to be
exactly.
memorable.
Yeah. Actually, Robin, have you ever read the Watchmen by Alan Moore, the graphic novel?
No, I have not. I'm
They
not really
made
a graphic novel fan, to be honest. And I know that sounds weird
no, I
about The Walking Dead. I've watched the series. I haven't read the
yeah.
graphic novel.
Well, they made a film of it and they didn't do a bad job.
Hmm.
But the book is one of my favorite books of all time. I absolutely love The Watchmen. And there's a character in it, Ozymandias, who um is he's got a bit of a god complex, um, but his intentions are kind of honorable, but
Hmm.
his way of getting the job done is definitely not so honorable. And then there's another character in it called Rorschach, who is just black and white. He just, if you do something wrong, he'll just shoot you in the head. You know what I mean? He's
Oh,
drop you
okay.
down a mine shaft, a lift shaft. He's a very black and white character. Um, and again, and it actually goes into his past and why he is sort
Hmm.
of why his brain is wired the way it is, and he's a very, very sympathetic character. But you're all the way through, you're like, oh, don't do that, So that's a really Alan Moore is a really good writer, one of my favorites of all time. Maybe underrated, I think,
Yeah.
by mainstream standards.
Hmm.
But yeah, well worth a read.
I have actually read a couple of books, and of course, I'm not going to say who wrote them or what books they are. I'm not going to go into that because I'm not, that's not who I am. But I have read books before where the characters were so shallow. They were so kind of on the surface. You didn't get below their who they are and why, what they want, and you got maybe a description, you maybe got who they care about, but that's and their job, and that's about it. You didn't get in any deeper than that in
Well,
a couple of the books that I've read, it's really irritating because
it is, yeah.
sometimes you can find a book that's actually really good, but the characters are so flat, you don't care about them. And
Yeah,
you need
or
to
they're
make sure
just
you
so
care.
unpleasant sometimes. Yeah, absolutely. And I am going to name drop here because A, he's been dead for a long time, so I don't think he cares whether I enjoyed his book or not. And B, he's like one of the most popular authors of all time. But Hemingway,
Uh-huh.
I my brother actually recommended Fiesta by Ernest
Hmm.
Hemingway. And funnily enough, a couple of days after he recommended it, I was in Carlisle train station. They have a shelf. You put a donation in a box and take a book.
Oh, nice.
And there was a collection of Ernest Hemingway there, and it was in there. And I thought, oh, brilliant! Jesse's just recommended this. And I just hated every character in it. I mean, he
Oh.
did write beautiful descriptions.
Hmm.
I'll give him that. I mean, I can see why Hemingway's an acclaimed author, but by golly, I did not like anyone in it. I just didn't care what happened to any of them. In fact, to be
Yeah.
honest, if they'd have all just fallen off a cliff at the end of the story, I'd have been quite happy because they were just, for me, it was, it was difficult to care because
Hmm.
they were just all so unpleasant, I suppose. But again, but I love train spotting and none of them are particularly pleasant either. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess
But
it just depends on the reader.
I was about to say that somebody else that has read that book may have absolutely loved it for a different reason. That
Yeah.
they're maybe not that invested in characters, themselves.
Yeah.
But the thing that I think we come down to, kind of summarizing everything that we've talked about today, is just to make sure you do your research on your characters and make
Yeah.
sure that they are believable. They're not
Yeah.
perfect because nobody's perfect. And if they are perfect, people may not like them. And Chaz might actually name drop you in a future video.
Not while you're alive. If you're alive, I'll be very kind.
But just to make sure that you want to make people care about your characters. And if you care about your character, if you have a relationship, so to speak, with your character, then other people are going to care about them too.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah.
That does it for this week's video. So remember, what we always say is that we just want you just to keep writing.
Yeah. And good luck.
We'll see you next time.